Chapter 4. The Fat Man and the Preacher. A fat man in a fat car sped down a highway in a hurry to get to the very place he didn't want to be. Passing a ragged hitchhiker, he surprised himself by braking and motioning for the hitchhiker to come. Driving, he introduced himself as Don, a salesman. He spoke of his unassuming wife and 3 fine youngsters, a boring job, his uncontrollable appetite. And as Charlie listened, the man's answers were in his questions. The fat man was talking to himself. When Charlie pointed this out to him, the man became elated. They spoke further of birth and death, and what of religion? He belonged to an obscure sect of Christianity, the Rosicrucians. His best friend, Dean, was a traditional Methodist minister. Confidentially, both men had been looking to try LSD. Did Charlie know where they could get some? Charlie went to see his parole officer and returned to San Jose to fulfill the fat man's request, remaining with him while he experienced his first immediate sensations since childhood. Grateful for the chance to revisit perspicacity, the fat man had taken Charlie to meet Dean, the Methodist preacher, an uptight, compact Mr. Clean, dressed in all black. Dean was not cheerful. A man in a black raincoat was at the door of Paula's apartment in Santa Barbara and called me by name. It took me several moments to recognize him as Charlie, barbered and clean-shaven. He enthusiastically told about his visits with Don and Dean, 2 educated suburban family men. Don was of average height and weighed at least 300 pounds. His little wife probably didn't amount to a third of that. They owned a nice home in San Jose, where their 5-year-old son had told Charlie that his mother wouldn't let him sit on the couch. Charlie loved this story and told it often. The little boy said that he wanted his mother to put up a picture of the couch so that he could sit on the real one. Don had talked about religion and moving away from the suburbs. Dean was the Methodist preacher, already in the process of moving his family to a cabin in the Ukiah woods. He'd invited Charlie to bring Mary and me there to meet his wife and teenage daughter. Don and Dean were both taking a big step. They were dropping out. Dr. Timothy Leary's call for humanity to turn on, tune in, and drop out was not heeded by the American majority, but it seemed so in California. Dean had taken his first acid trip with Charlie in San Francisco. He'd laughed about superficial things he'd once considered important, and as tears rolled down his face, he'd said that he remembered what it is to feel. We left Paula's to visit these men after Charlie got his new driver's license. Stopping at a roadside motel, Mary and I met the fat Don. He said he would be moving his family out of San Jose but had not yet collected the courage to tell his wife about a change in their lifestyle. That night, as we sat around the motel room, talking, Charlie transformed. His voice, though not louder, filled the room with its magnitude, and his words were so powerful that my spine felt pulled through the top of my head. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Suddenly, he noticed his own hand extended in an authoritative gesture, and he became still. Chuckling uneasily, he asked, "What am I talking about?" His assertive voice answered, "Don't question it." And instantly, he returned to the previous expressions. My amazement was complete. When the meeker Charlie appeared again, he said, "I'm just listening to this for the first time myself." The next day, as we drove north through evergreen forests, I wished that everyone could have seen and heard Charlie. I wished that we could have filmed and recorded him, because I couldn't recreate or even remember what I had witnessed. It was lost to the moments from which it had come. The preacher's 15-year-old daughter waved to us from the deck of their 2-bedroom cabin above a rushing stream. Charlie had accurately likened Ruth to a dark-eyed fawn, her slender limbs sticking from loose shorts and a crop top. Her thick brunette hair had been attractively boy-bobbed, exposing a decidedly girl neck. In the house, she sat listening to us talk with her father, and later, by the vanity mirror in her room, told Mary and me about a high school boyfriend while opening bottles of perfume and offering us whiffs. "This is musk," she said. "It's deer cum. Did you know it?" During the next days, Mary, Ruth, and I walked the banks of the rapid creek below her cabin and became as close as we ever would. Ruth navigated the wet rocks like a wild girl, her feet as tough as her will, but she patiently waited for us to catch up. I began dwelling on my own shortcomings shortly after meeting her. Her skin was golden and as smooth as a baby's. She was everything I wished to be, carelessly beautiful and comfortably connected to nature. One day, I felt like such a clumsy and speckled loser. I climbed a hill, sat down and cried, oblivious to all but myself, until I heard dogs barking at the foot of the hill. The thought of those squat little animals leading her to my distress made me laugh. Ruth's communication with them and her regard for me gave me a stronger admiration for her than the personal comparisons I was making. Ruth's father was going through his own changes. After preaching the Bible for more than 20 years, Dean wasn't sure about any of it. His personal life had become a schism. The more doubtful he had become, the more forceful his proclamations from the pulpit. He said that confessing this lifted a heavy weight from his mind, and he thanked us there for being there to hear it. Dean was not an atheist. He would continue to speak of God, but under no marquee of church or religion. He and Charlie reveled in history as put forth in the Bible about Jesus, his people, and times. But in a pensive moment, Charlie posed this question. If you were God, and you loved your creation, would you want to be way up somewhere looking down on it? I wouldn't. I'd want to be right in the middle of it. I'd want to be living it. Later, he said that God, the Father, and Jesus, the Son, are in the nature of man. Dean smiled with great pleasure, but disagreed. He revealed his belief that Charlie was man's son. Jesus Christ returned. Returned? Charlie exclaimed gleefully. Jesus Christ never went anywhere. Christ is a living consciousness. I may reflect it, but it's in you first, or you wouldn't recognize it. But Dean was unready to believe he could harbor divinity. The fat man hurried into the preacher's cabin, his big face flushed with fear. After taking LSD, his furniture had spoken to him. It had begun innocently, with a whisper from a stuffed chair. The coffee table had chimed in, and the couch was loudest of all. Buy more of me. Get more of me. 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 The cacophony was maddening. In a panic, he had tried unsuccessfully to hide under his covers. He had retreated into the Bible, gaining a modicum of peace by construing its characters as living people. Mary and I were biblical sisters. Manson, again Christ. And Dean, he thought, he might have a role as John the Baptist. But where did he himself fit in? Moses? Solomon? He'd spent the day looking for himself in the book, probably to avoid being a man bullied by his furniture. The message in the fantasy, however, was clear to him. He was addicted, desperately, unhealthily attached to properties that could not sustain his life. We talked through the evening, providing camaraderie and some consolation, but his addictions were many, and none of them illegal. Ruth's mother had gone home to the suburbs before we arrived, but one day she returned to retrieve her daughter and do battle with a husband who was no longer hers. Dean invited her to relax and take off her armor. He told her that he needed to start over, and he asked her to be patient with him. She was in an awkward position, older than the rest of us, more set in her ways. She argued and fumed and refused to say any more than a few words to Dean's suspicious visitors. Finally, he told her that he loved her, but would not allow her to spread misery in his house. After failing to convince Ruth to go with her, she left angrily and sent the county sheriffs to pick up her runaway daughter. Ruth's father was gone the day they came for her. She calmly told the two officers that she was not a runaway and that she loved her mother, but was happy living with her father and didn't want to leave him. The sheriffs threatened to arrest her, but she held her ground. Charlie offered that she was not legally bound to live with her mother, and about 20 minutes later, 12 officers from the sheriff's department had the house surrounded. Put into a squad car, Ruth told the officers that they should be stopping the lumber companies from robbing the forest. She was sent south to live with her mother. Charlie spent the week in jail for verbal interference with her arrest. When Dean returned, he was apologetic and quick to pay Charlie's fine. Far from being discouraged, he planned to visit his wife and daughter and to see us again. Heading towards San Francisco, Charlie told us he saw good reasons for marriage, but that divorce had taken the word out of marriage. The husband and wife trip was to ensure everyone a chance for life and fulfillment. Then kings and queens played divorce. Marriage was lost in truth when King Henry VIII started that. A house divided. 1967 would be known in San Francisco as the Summer of Love, coined insincerity by hippies and repeated by straight commentators, most of whom meant it as rampant sex. Straight people were separated from hippies only by the lines in their own minds, never venturing outside grids of habit. Charlie said, "Do you realize some people get married, have kids, and die, and never find out what sex is?" Federal sanction of the contraceptive pill in the 60s was credited with relaxing fears of pregnancy and social prohibitions. But maybe ideas about sex have always been confused. The extreme being that sex is dirty, evil, an obligation in marriage, and a perversion outside of it. Thoughts of nastiness coupled with innate physical pleasure created all manner of desperate behaviors and markets. But in every era, some people have known sex as both an enjoyable and sacred expression. Haight-Ashbury had its share of tawdry and random hookups, but there, if not throughout the modern world, sex in the latter 60s was considered natural and healthful. Even Father Mike disavowed celibacy for a live-in girlfriend, an oddly pedestrian arrangement of pleasantries and housekeeping duties. When Mike and the other tenants were at work, we had the house to ourselves. Charlie was smooth. He opened us with finesse. Clean and conscious, he enjoyed himself without shame and seemed to embody a wholesome masculinity, the confluence of body, mind, and spirit. His touch was healing. It stirred in me regret at having slept most of my life and a longing to open up the rest of it. His vitality renewed itself beyond what one woman could hold. He excused himself, saying he was making up for lost time, but there was more than that. He wanted children. He said, "I want to reproduce myself in your likeness, not only in the flesh, but in the soul." At times, I thought of him as holy, even as he played upon my embarrassments with comic lechery. In love, I felt that he gave us everything he had. My resistance surrendered, and then he said something I thought profound. What you feel is what you give, not what I give. You feel your own love. Runaways arrived in San Francisco, having hitchhiked from all parts of the country, some as young as 13, and some who would go to bed with anyone who asked them. Charlie could spot them at a glance. He said that without protection of the law, they were vulnerable. We brought some to Father Mike's, but our relationship with the paying tenants was already on shaky ground, and Mike was too busy to take on the responsibility. Charlie talked to these kids like he knew them, and they were quick to respond. He smiled at me when the ingenues stared at him, wide-eyed and beguiling. Then he told them funny stories, or showed them crazy faces to put on if anyone tries to run you with fear. We walked back to Mike's house talking about them. He said, "There should be a place where they can grow up to be themselves." The city was really too much for Charlie, and we never stayed long. Somewhere on our way to the woods, we got out of the car for a walk down a country road, and he noticed a tree that had been hit by lightning or broken by the wind. Sap was running from it. Not far away, we'd seen a rolling vat of tar in use to repair the highway. The connection was natural, and soon he was in the tree smearing tar on the wound. A stiff man with a large black dog approached, asking, "What are you doing?" Without looking down, Charlie replied, "Fixing this tree." "Is that your tree?" the man demanded. "No," Charlie responded, looking at him. "I thought it belonged to itself." "Get off this land," the man ordered. I couldn't tell if he was angry or afraid. "This is private property. Get off this land now. I'll call the police." He went away. Charlie finished tarring the trunk, and we hurried back to the car so he wouldn't get arrested for aiding a tree. He said, "It's against the law to care." "In prison," he said, "there was only one law I lived by. No snitching. And I didn't think much about it because it was the law I grew up with. My law was my word to myself." He used the word like no one else I had ever heard. He quoted Genesis to Father Mike. "First was the Word, and the Word was God." But he put more emphasis on the word than on the word God. "Breach of word," he said, "breaks people away from God and themselves." These traveling monologues often most related to situations at hand. But he talked a lot about being lied to and learning to lie, which seemed entirely about his own situation. He said, As a kid, I lied. And I used to think I got away with it because no one else knew. But I knew. I learned that I'm worse on myself than on anyone. Others forgive and forget. But I've got to live with my own lies forever. While driving, Charlie recalled, "Here's a riddle. A traveler walking down a road comes to a fork. 2 unmarked roads. He knows that one road leads to Truthville and the other leads to Liarsville. He wants to go to Truthville. A local resident is standing at the fork offering direction. If he's from Truthville, he's got to tell the truth. But if he's from Liarsville, he'll lie. The traveler is wise and asks just one question." What is the question? I tried out several ideas, but before he told us the answer, which was, "From which way did you come?" Our little red trailer on the beach by Mendocino looked lonely, but was unmolested and as cozy as we'd left it. From the cove, we took day trips to Fort Bragg, Ukiah, Willits, and the Redwoods, passing lumber trucks and tough men whose lives and skills were bound to forest management. August 1967. Dear God, we've been out admiring your artwork. Your redwoods are masterpieces. We just thought we'd turn them into picnic tables and trash bins. How do you like that idea? A century before our arrival, Fort Bragg was militarily active. Among its tasks was the supervision of a Pomo Indian reservation. The Pomo had been encamped inland until U.S. President Franklin Pierce settled a property dispute in favor of American newcomers, ordering the Pomo off their home ground and onto a piece of land near Fort Bragg. The reservation had lasted less than 10 years. Its failure, according to an official report, due to poor management, poor native adaptation, and white encroachment. The sky turned more frequently gray, and a chill dampness filled the coves. Mary left us on such a morning. She didn't say why. I followed her down the beach, fitting my feet in the prints she left. We'd never talked much, but I'd learned her ways. Characteristically reserved, smart, stubborn, and capable of scorching sarcasm. Her regard for him took down all barriers. I remember the amazement and amusement we shared in watching Charlie, her disappointment at having to share him, the way she could make me freeze from across a room, and the relief of finally seeing her laugh. And at the time, I sympathized with Mary's chemical and emotional changes, because by then, I too was pregnant. Squinting, she stared out to sea, and when a squall blew back her hair, I saw her tears, and I knew that the clouds had broken. She stopped beside a boulder the size of a boat and got up on its deck. When I thought she wouldn't mind, I climbed up beside her, and we drifted for a long time. I don't know who spoke first, but by late afternoon, we were hurrying home to make dinner. It was blustery cold and time to move on. We fantasized baking on a beach in Mexico. Charlie had fled there in the 1950s after his parole officer issued a warrant for his arrest. He had sought what he called the soul in a Mexican park where he was learning to play flamenco guitar and sing Mexican songs. He translated a few, but said it was not the same in English. He said that when the Triumph sports car he was driving broke down, he was sitting by the side of the road, and a Mexican woman, short and sturdy, with a husband who loved her and a house full of kids, welcomed him to a meal, washed his clothes, and hung them in the sun. She showed me the giving of woman. The professor's wife appeared tense and disheveled. He was solemn. After she left the tent, Charlie apologized for our intrusion. He informed the professor that we would be leaving the beach. The professor said that, despite his love for it, he would probably have to leave it as well. His wife had married a man of income and social status, not to be eroding on some vacant beach. Charlie suggested that maybe they could go on the road and see the land. He said that they could have her trailer, that his wife might be happier with a little stove and a refrigerator. The man was smiling when we left him. He was a gentle man, brave in his own way, yet fragile in his love for his wife. On the morning we departed, I arose feeling wonderfully unencumbered. I leapt around the fire with my wings outstretched and my nose up to meet the gusts of cold wind. Suddenly, we were running towards the ocean, Charlie and I, swallowing air until my lungs could hold no more, stopped abruptly and breathless at the shore. He took the chain with the skate key off his neck and handed it to me. Without word or thought, I threw it as far as I could into the turbulent sea. Suddenly realizing what I'd done, I turned to see my reflection, laughing and eyes knowing. On the way to Mexico, in Santa Barbara, we picked up Paula, taking her to visit her husband on Terminal Island. En route, we were conjuring up a vehicle we could sleep in. Along a private beach in Trancas, a wealthy section of Malibu, Charlie saw a dusty Volkswagen bus parked beside a big house, now surrounded by several other cars. He speculated that its owners didn't use the bus more than 3 weeks out of the year. So he got out of our car and went to their door to ask, "Could we use your VW bus now and bring it back all shiny and in good working condition the 3 weeks you need it?" A platinum woman freaked at the door and said she would call the police. Charlie had to talk to her and her featherless husband and their little flock into coming out to our dented car to see that there were indeed 3 girls in it, and that he did play music for a living. Out came the guitar. The woman scowled. The capon cowered, and the chicks clustered. Charlie sang a tender, popular love song as the sun set over the ocean. The woman softened. "That's very pretty," she said. "You should try to get yourself recorded." Then she apologized, was very busy. They all smiled, waved goodbye, and followed her into the house. Charlie said that he used to think that all the good people were outside of prison. But each time he got out, he'd see people stabbing each other in the back. The only difference, he said, was that the ones inside admitted to being cons. There were always a few guys in each penitentiary who told the truth. The ones doing 50 or 80 years for not snitching on their partners. They were the ones who said, "Friday, I'll give you what I owe you." And Friday, they brought what they owed. Their word was their bond. And you could find maybe 4 or 5 of them in each penitentiary. And they most often were in the hole. Mary and I were not immune to the glamour surrounding the Italian-American Mafia. And Charlie was not shy about getting attention. So it surprises me that he was slow to mention even casual associations. He didn't use the word Mafia, but it was clear that some men he had met were connected to organized crime families. One of my prison dads was from Baltimore, he told us. Frankie Carbo. His wife was the greatest. She would send him a box for Christmas. 4 pounds of candy each year. And he would always give me half. And we would walk the yard and talk. He used to run booze in the 1920s with the Rocco brothers from Philly. He was a grand old con man, and I didn't miss a thought from him. Despite his obvious respect for such people, I think now that Charlie's life had conditioned him against any attachments to persons, places, or things. His home had been wherever people put him, and anything he had could be taken away. It didn't exactly make him cold. It made him confident. He could ask for anything and give anything away. I don't think I ever heard him directly ask for money, but it seemed that people couldn't wait to give it to him. His conception of money was something to the effect that, as long as we kept it in motion, there was bound to be enough of it to go around. It gave him a personal freedom. "If you have to have it," he said, "it puts too much value on it. It only has real value when you don't have to worry about it." He played with clothes and instruments and passed them on. I saw him begin to give some things and pause to ask himself if he really wanted to part with them. He had some nice things, but he'd give them up if someone needed, or even looked like they'd like to have them. The feeling was not to have lost, but to have gained a new freedom. We had nothing, yet everything. It hadn't occurred to me that we had everything, only because Charlie had no reservations about deserving or accepting it. The fat man on the phone was worried. He told Charlie he had sold his home, but the new owners were due in 5 days, and he had yet to find a place for the grand concert piano he'd left in the living room. When Charlie mentioned that we were looking for a Volkswagen bus, Don said that if we could move that piano within 5 days, we could sell it and have the money for the bus. Energetically pursuing a task, we traveled to San Jose and found a suitable VW bus for just over $1,000. When local music stores were reluctant to take on the piano at real value, we offered it for little more than the cost of the bus and made the 5-day headline. Those few days in Don's empty house, Charlie talked about using the still-connected telephone to call his mother, who he believed was living in Washington State. But again, he let the opportunity pass. Charlie's frayed address book provided us plenty of places to visit and stay. In Sacramento, Peter J. DeLeo opened his front door and grabbed Charlie by the back of the neck, welcoming him in like a son. "Charlie," he called with a tight, glinting grin. "Charlie, what have you been doing? You kids hungry?" Pete lived in middle-class suburbia, but he had a full bar in his living room and a big, shiny, well-equipped kitchen. He had grapes growing in his backyard and lots of business visitors. While he cooked us omelets in olive oil, he and Charlie caught up. "Yeah, the world had changed," Pete muttered, and he was none too happy about it. "Those girlies out there giving it away. Bad for business." He sounded worried, and I couldn't hide my amusement. Straight up, Pete was a high-end bartender and a professional pimp, unlike anyone I had ever met, and a lot like gangsters in old movies. He sounded like Cagney and used Aussie rhyme slang more out of habit than to conceal his intentions. He told Charlie he had to see Hank and Frank about some bees and honey. We stayed only a few hours, during which Charlie and Pete exchanged tough talk, short snaps and caps on former associates, and Charlie gave Pete his new outlook on the world at large. He didn't know about this love stuff, he told Pete, but he thought he'd go along with it because he believed in the kids. Later, Charlie told us that Pete was old-fashioned, but meant well and had done him right in the past. He said, "Pete don't like the new. In the old ways with women, there was no sex before weddings, no nude bodies, no children out of wedlock. In Pete's line of work, that was money. Tricks came to his place for what they couldn't get at home, or get at all. Now it's a new game." Charlie knew a lot about working girls. I didn't know what the Mann Act was, but the charges were on his rap sheet. He explained that in his early 20s, while on parole, he'd taken the first job he could get. It was at a hot dog stand. Among the conditions of parole, he was not to associate with ex-felons. He said he didn't know anyone but ex-felons, and that the hot dog job put him to sleep. When an old school con offered an alternative, he'd accepted training and went on to manage 3 women in L.A. who worked hotels and bars. He said the money was good. He wore expensive suits, drove a sports car, and flashed diamonds. He laughed. I was miserable. The women expected to be treated bad. I'd put on a show, get all riled up, go into a bar and order the best scotch. He laughed again. I hated the taste of scotch. I asked if he was saying that the women wanted to be hit. He said, if you didn't act tough, the women thought you didn't care. With street girls, the way was if anyone tried to take your woman, you were supposed to get mean and do bad. I always told the women, go with them. Get what they got and bring it back to me. Others said that was wrong and someone would take my women. I said, if you hold to a woman in fear, you show her doubt, that you don't trust her and you ain't sure of yourself. I felt if I showed myself unsure, the women would reflect that. This indirectly hooks with something else he said about women that I thought funny and sad, but so true. He said, I had a girlfriend. She said, I love you. I said, I love you. She said, I don't love you. I was broken. Another said, I love you. I said, I don't love you. And she said she loved me more. She said, please love me. And I said, okay, I love you. And she said, good. I don't love you. Someone, it must have been Father Mike, gave Charlie a drum that he loved and decided to keep until we're done playing with it. He said that the only other instrument he'd ever been attached to was the guitar he'd made in prison. His mother had offered to have it lacquered and strung for him. I asked if it was the one on the back seat. She never brought it back. I sent it out with her, and she never brought it back. After a pause, he said, that's the last time I ever spoke to her. That's one thing about a guitar. It'll never lie to you. I thought I finally understood Charlie's animosity towards his mother, and I shared it. But days later, when I said something about his mother, he surprised me with a fierce look. My mom was a 14-year-old runaway. She was just a kid when she had me, and she had more love than anyone around her had the eyes to see. For me to put words on paper, I myself must first understand them in a true light, within the word honest. Years of prison cells, as if in one large brain, I've heard, seen, and watched my own thoughts turn a universe. I start like life does, with moms in Ragtown, Ohio, as I was told by my earliest recollections of images, calling themselves aunts, uncles, grandmothers, and later. A woman came out of prison with a guy she called brother, and she looked like me and called herself mother, and all said I was to do the same. Uncle Luther and Kay did a nickel. That's 5 years in prison talk. He was a gambler, and Mom's was like a barmaid. And the years of the Depression was hard on them. Strong armed robbery carried 5 years. I remember going in the prison at Moundsville, West Virginia to see them, and how the big stones were like the temple of a solemn place. I never realized I would spend my life in such temples of suffering. My other uncles and cousins were all hill people from Scotland, Ireland, and settled in the hills of Kentucky and West Virginia, right after Daniel Boone kicked the Indians out of their space. Jess was my first and foremost person. To wit of truth in my child's mind, did he put himself with rage? Nothing short of a mean old mountain man. If words could touch him, with a wood shack from his own hands, built upon stilts. He was known as a well digger, water finder, and dog trainer, as wherever Jess was, the town dogs tagged. He hated cars, schools, government men, or anyone that wasn't kind or kin to someone he already knew. His old lady had a big iron pot to cook apples, no shoes, and 4 daughters in feed sack dresses would tend the fire and do their giggling. The state officials told Jess, "Get the children in school." But Jess vowed, "No young'uns of mine will go to school. Can't take the kids from the land. The land is life." And he would yell and beat everyone with a stick. He turned on me. I had pushed a dog off the porch, 10 feet or so, and I lied about it. They put a bucket over my head and beat it and yelled, "Never lie! Don't lie! Liars go to hell!" That bucket became my own. I was to carry the water, for it was time to kill the pig. I don't remember any money, for it was always, "I'll dig your well and bring my cow to be bred," or "I'll trade a hand-stitched quilt for 5 jars of shine." The garden was income, and Jess was always in the woods running possums, coons, or whatever was plenty. He would get all the kin with a big fire, the pot, jars, buckets, and the killings would begin. His knife was long and thin, and he would cut the hog's throat and be on with it. With a fast move, he'd cut his tail off and put it in my hand. Then he would yell, "Send this kid to the city and tell them people to stay away and leave us alone. No school, and I'm gonna make shine as long as there is a forever." Another uncle or some kin had just put dynamite under his house, under his still, in the yards, everywhere. And the U.S. government came in and blew him, his wife, his kids, and himself up, and the hills and hollows were rumbling with things, and I didn't realize. Grandmom would get free tickets on the railroad, 'cause Granddad was a conductor, and a World War I vet with medals and a kind of a hero to everyone but Jess. Later, I heard Jess had died in the nut house somewhere in Louisville, Kentucky, and my other cousin, Wormy, he was called Wormy because he dug fishing worms as a kid and sold them, saved his money, built a big market, got rich, never learned to read or write, and when he played big shot, he went east for a trip. Came back with a fine class woman, what in turn beat him for his money and left him back on the riverbank digging worms and crying for his mother. I heard he died in the same nut house Jess did. My mother was a bartender. She drank a lot, and she used to come and get me out of bed so her and Uncle John could go to bed. There would always be $20 or $30 more, and like she wasn't what they call a flatback, But she was a hustling girl. I got sold for a pitcher of beer once, but when I went up to the tall people of the attention, a dog hit me with his tail when the people wasn't looking and showed me big teeth as if to say, "This is my people. Stay away. No space for you here." So I went on down the road and the grown-up said, "He don't like us and won't come to us." So I was sent to a place where people that got no one goes. I don't remember how I escaped, but when they found me riding in a boxcar, I told them, "My granddad runs this train." And they said, "What's his name?" And I remember Grandma getting me back. Off to another uncle. Even as a child, I knew they were not smart. Uncle Bill had no teeth and was always getting down on me and calling me stupid. I got to their pad on Christmas, and their daughter was my first friend in love, Joanne. She kept the other kids from beating me up. Grandmom said it's a sin to fight, and when Bill seen I didn't fight, he put a dress on me and sent me to school. Then Granny gave me a witch's hat to wear in the cakewalk, and for Christmas I got a hairbrush with Superman on it. Let down because the other kids got dolls and buggies, like little plates and dollhouses. I ran to the icebox, got a can of pet milk with all the cows' heads on it, and hid and sucked the milk from the icebox. I knowed as Mom because I hadn't caught up to her. She was still in the pen. Grandmom caught me and said, "Why you cry, boy?" And I said, "A hairbrush is all I got." You gotta know a hillbilly grandmom to understand. She read one book, the Bible. No movies, no makeup, no sex, and she never lied. She said, "Boy, you got the best gift of all. That's the magic brush. And who knows? If you brush your hair with that brush, you may be able to fly, just like Superman." Eyes dried up, rag around my neck, brush in hand, I'm off to fly. Off the porch, cars, for days I worked to fly. Then I almost did it. I leapt off the fender of a car, and the wind caught me just so, and I thought it was happening. I ran into the shack where moonshine jars were being passed around, yelling, "I can almost do it! I can almost do it!" Uncle Bill was drunk. He said, "Almost do what?" "I can almost fly." He said, "You idiot, you can't fly. What's wrong with this damn kid?" And he went back to knock me down. Back to the icebox. Cry, cry, cry. The next day I got all the toys and dolls, put them in a pile in the dollhouse, and I set it on fire. Broke the piggy bank and was on the road again. Highway police caught me, gave me the ice cream and attention I had never known. And for years I thought subconsciously that cops were like fathers and nice guys, and the judge was like a god. I've never had no one to hold on to. The warden, the judge, they were God to me, till I caught them lying. When I ran away and they got me back, this old black man in court was crying and begging the judge, "Judge, I didn't steal that dog." And he looked at me and he said, "He just followed me home." I thought he was talking about me. Then I ran right into my aunt coming to take me back, and on the train again out of Kentucky and West Virginia to the prison where Mom and Luther were. McMecken, West Virginia. The town next to Moundsville, where the prison was. I see my first movie with Bing Crosby, got my ass beat, and ran away, and lived with 2 river tramps that gave me a cup of coffee. Back to court and a foster home where I met some honest, hard-working people that had concern. Few I've met, but I know there are some, and I would still be a part of them. But some lady came and said, "I'm your mother. Let's go." I started out learning moms. Her life gave her little chance for happiness and little hope for choices. She was pushed out of the house at 14, got pregnant, had me, went to prison. Now she's out and a tough little girl behind the bar of a honky-tonk, the Blue Moon. Other girls of the U.S. don't know hillbillies. They're not cowboys or Okies. If you weren't dying in the coal mines, you were lucky to work in the steel mills or on the railroad. And if the pad you lived in had a wood floor, that was uptown. Crime was crime, and outlaw women were few. I lived in a room up over the Blue Moon with Mom as she came in on the run and said, "Pack fast!" And out the back door we went. She had hit a Beanie Brother in the head with a 5th of Jim Beam whiskey and laid him out. He and another brother was out on bail on a murder trial for cutting a woman's head off. They put it on a pole and throwed her body in the river. Me, Moms, and a salesman for the Holland Furnace Company were off to Indianapolis, Indiana, and she changed her name to Kathleen Deere. They drank a lot and let me in the streets. And that let me in the streets. Uncle Bill's dress had taught me to fight, and I think I caused the invention of bicycle locks because when I started stealing bikes, there were no locks. I had a paper corner selling papers until I seen you could put a rag up in the payphones and come back later, pick up the nickels. I spent all my time at the movies, pool halls, and bowling alleys where I set pins. And I was too young and too little, but I got a job at the Mecca Theater where Hopalong Cassidy and Bob Steele, Buster Crabbe, and Roy and Jean rode high in the saddle. $5 a week sweeping and running between 2 picture shows for the boss. But I got greedy and the telephones weren't paying off well, so I moved into stamp machines. 2-cent and 1-cent stamps. I had stolen some stamp dispensers and I got caught in the market with all the pennies and nickels and then off to boys' school and juvenile halls. Moms would run her prison trip to me, how the food was so bad. Her job was sweeping and mopping the killing floor where men were hung. One day they came to hang a guy when she was still in the mop room, and she hid and wasn't seen. They set the trap and the noose and something went wrong. The man was too big or the rope wasn't right and his head popped off. It came off his body and rolled down the steps to where she was hiding, and she said it blinked at her. Her fear of that ran off onto me, and I took it and never realized until I was on death row for 9 counts of murder and 7 death sentences on a trip not my own. I learned to run early in this life. The cops would pick me up off the streets, and some juvenile court would send me to a kid's place, and I would hit the fence, never learning what friends were, and never having anyone to ask what to do. To run was all I knew. Highway 40 went to California, and I ran that road a lot. My first bust came for the market and stealing stamp machines. And 25th and Keystone became my home, and they had tall fences, and running away became breaking out. After 3 tries, I thought to play a different angle, So I put a sob story on a priest and was sent to the boys' town in Omaha, Nebraska. A ride on the train. I got there somewhere in the 1940s, 46 or 47, and 3 days later, I was gone. Vern Black told me of his uncle who was sharp, and we hit the road to Peoria, Illinois, walked through a snowstorm and stole a hearse, a Packard, and kicked in the back windows of gas stations. I went to sleep at the wheel in Peoria, and we hit the streets on the run to end up at his uncle's pad, where, a few burglaries later, I was in that hole again and shipped back to 25th and Keystone. That place was a curse to me, and I was so sad to see it, but I escaped 4 times. I cut the wires on the back windows of the little boys' dormitory. Me and 35 kids broke out into the night. Newspaper, the Indianapolis Star, had just done a story about the new Indian blankets at the hall. They did another story showing the blankets out the back windows. They said I was the mind behind the mass break, and my first big jail stood in front of me at age 13. That was Newcastle. The jail was on an old castle in Indianapolis, an old Scottish castle given to the city, and they made a county jail out of it. It was big. Cell blocks with rows of cages. When I was taken inside, a bunch of people were outside carrying signs that said, "The world is coming to an end." I was the youngest person ever to go to that jail. I would curse, spit, smoke, fight, and no kid told me shit, and all the grown-ups were fools to me. County jail cops said, "No, we can't take him. He's too young." But the juvie cops said, "We can't hold him. He made 35 kids run away. He's no little boy. He only looks like one." So they made a place in county jail outside of the BR named for Bums Row. I was kept on the catwalk that went around the Bums' Row cells. There were 18 of us kids, and each day was total madness. About 80 men set my young mind to much more than I realized. They were all like Uncle Jess, but that was like their kid, and each gave me something. Every day something new was jumping off, and I loved it. The FBI had just shot and killed someone on the 10 most wanted list, and they were all talking about the guy's gun mall. Had a butterfly tattooed on her puss. One of the winos was a nut, and for cutting the wombs from dead women and trying to buy wine with them. Another guy cut his wrist and put his arm and hand in a bucket of warm water. Another hung himself. They were running at the end of the road. Now I was just in training for the run through my life. 10 or so other kids had escaped with me, and they did what I said, or I would kick their ass. And all the old men liked me, and each one was setting my thoughts. I didn't realize until later. The monks were men, but this was a different game. The cell doors opened on the inside, where toilets and showers and games were played, and coffee was cooked, and the older men roamed back and forth. The back side of the cells faced the outside catwalk, and we could walk around and talk with each cell, and each was a world I had never seen into. I learned to spit on my dick and stick it in this guy's ass. The guy that killed himself had gave me some head and told me how to fuck this other kid. Then he said, "But don't ever let no one fuck you, kid. And never let anyone get away with whipping your ass. Get a stick, whatever you must, but never let no one get away with playing any shit off on you." To shower and shit, we would raise the turnkey, and he would key us in and give us time to do the 3 S's. Shave, shower, and shit. There were winos with DTs making snakes and fears of all kinds. And being a mean kid, I would torment and get off on him. One thought he was stuck in a grain elevator, and I would tell him, "I'm chopping the cables, and you're about to die, but suck my dick and I'll let you live." "No, no," he cried. So I'd make him wash my shorts and shirts, and he would fuck 'em up, and I'd throw water on him. Another old man said, "Can I wash your socks?" And I gave him 3 pairs to do, and someone said, "Watch him, kid. He's a klepto." I said, "What's that?" "A kleptomaniac. He steals anything and everything." He came back with 5 socks, and I said, "Where's my other sock?" And he put his hand over his pocket and said, "I don't know." I smacked him and got the sock out of his pocket. Each person that passed me set something in my young, open mind, and a lot of it I never realized until years later. Like, one night, a big poker game was going on, and I played like I was going in to shower, but it was really to watch the game, because this one guy was teaching me how to deal and play cards. Everyone was watching, and Klepto was standing in the corner looking at the ceiling. The game peaked. All the money was between 2 men. Tough street men that didn't smile and played hard. One said, "Raise." The other called and raised. Called was the cry that echoed off the iron walls. Everyone was frozen. "Straight" was the next voice. My eyes were wide. My heart pumped, and the other guy said, "Sorry. Full house. You lose." He turned out his hand, and the other guy said, "That's only 2 pairs. Kings over 10s, man. Can't you see?" "I see 2 kings and 2 10s. Where's the other king?" He reached for the money, and his hand was slammed to the table. "Hold it. Count the cards. I had the king of hearts." "Well, it's not here now, and that's sad shit." And the money was taken, and everyone watched the loser. He looked under the table and yelled, "Who's got that king of hearts? I'm gonna kill. I will find it." And everyone looked at each other, and one by one, all eyes went to Klepto. "Klepto, you sorry dog. Did you get that card?" "No, sir. I've been standing here all the time. How could I?" And everyone was watching. Then his face was busted. It just turned red. His head bounced off the wall, and another punch caught him and turned him in a circle, and he hit the floor begging and crying, "No, sir, I don't have it." He was then kicked and beat from one end to the other. Next to death, he still swore he didn't steal the card. And the guy was tired of beating on him. "If I ever find out you took that card, I'll kill you." The turnkey called, and I went back outside the tank. I had never known such fear or seen such a thing. And I was busy running it all to the other kids when the doctor brought the old man back, all patched and bandaged up. I was being sent to reform school, the judge said, until I was 21. It was called boys' school, but I got some wild stories about it. I was due to leave the jail. Everyone was saying goodbyes and giving advice when Klepto slid up beside me and the man took off his face and said, "Boy, one day all this will be yours. God gave me all of everything, and I'm giving it to you because I'm gonna be God." And I said, "You're an old nut and a klepto." He said, "When you're with God, you can't steal because it's all yours." He said, "I got a gift for you." And he pulled that King of Hearts out of his pocket. My fear jumped up, up, up. "You dizzy old fool, hide that. You'll get killed, sure." "I did it for you, boy." "Oh, no, not for me." But he gave it to me and I hid it fast. He said, "You must remember, above all else, trust a liar to lie, a cheat to cheat. Trust yourself and no one else but the old man, boy, because he trusts himself and you and him." I took it in my head, but I didn't understand it until I was bitten by a snake, and when the poison came up and through my heart, it all became clear to me. And the old man with the beaten face and bandages was standing in my head laughing and said, See? My nows are in forever." Yes, that time in that old castle of Indianapolis County Jail was a trip. And when it ended, I was in handcuffs on my way once again. Put in with the little boys and rushed to a shower, a voice said, "Last one out gets a whack." They rushed past by me on the run, and I walked and stepped from the shower and pain hit me. I had picked up a razor blade in the shower to keep someone from being cut, and when I looked at what hit me, a smiling face said, "You're last out." I ran him behind the door. I whacked him with the razor blade, and he started to bleed and yelled, and he ran. So did I. I ran out the back door and was run down after about a 4-hour chase and taken and put with the bigger kids after the ass beating of my life. In them days, they had large straps that could bust you up, bad and fast. On to new halls and a different kind of man, not like the monks or the drunks. Just as real but different. Servicemen retired from Navy, Army, Marines, and we marched. I was put in between 4 big guys, and they were told if I ran out from under them, they got their asses beat. I was smart enough to get out of school, even if the law said school until 16 years. I pulled all kinds of tricks, got a hacksaw and hit the bush, swiped a 1946 Chevy, ran it through a gas station at 90 miles an hour, got popped and put back in Newcastle, Indiana jail, back to Plainfield, out again and back again, up and down that highway, always the same. I had the record for escapes, and the last one was 3 of us, tunneled through the bakery into where the doctor kept his car, and away we went. Highway, all the way to Utah. Beaver City Jail was 4 cells and a nice enough sheriff that wanted to give me a job on his ranch, but the judge said no. Back to Indiana, where I got U.S. government time for taking the car over state lines. Off to Washington, D.C., school for boys. Kids from Detroit, Cleveland, New York, Kentucky, and all over still marching and fighting. Dr. Hartman was a pushover for a story, so I got to go to a camp in 1950. Escape was my plan, but I got caught punking another kid in the butt. And at 17, I was sent to the first prison I was ever in, the U.S. prison at Petersburg, Virginia. The captain told them I was not a boy, but the Irish devil himself. I ran the food carts in the mess hall, got mad and ran everyone out of the mess hall and kitchen and bake shop and vegetable room, and I hit the lieutenant with a bucket of water and told him to clean the damn mess hall himself. I spent a whole year in the hole for that. A captain named of Bulldog Edwards walked a line past the whole cells. A con told me, "If you ever want out of here, you gotta ask him." I'd hear others crying to him, "Please, Captain, can I get out?" And his ego would build. "Well, I don't know," he'd say. "Are you gonna be a good boy?" They would say yes and beg, and he would swell up and feel big. The more they begged, the bigger he played. 3 months went by, and I didn't ask him nothing. One day, he broke his line. He came to me and said, "How are you, boy?" And I said, "Fine." He got mad and walked. 7 months later, he came over to me and said, "Son, do you have any problems you want to talk to me about?" And I said, "You would just laugh." He said, No, I might be able to do something for you." And I said, "I can't shit." He looked bewildered. And I said, "There is something you could do." But I hesitated to ask. He said, "Go ahead." And I said, "I'm all out of toilet paper. Would you run down there and get me a roll?" The next bus out of there, I was on it, transferred from Petersburg to Lewisburg in September 1952. The big walls were so high, the clouds seemed to touch, and it looked like a movie. "Too young," they said. So I was put in a place away from the main flow, where I met a guy named Big Frank from New York. And everyone respected him. Costello name meant nothing to me at the time. He talked to me like old friends about FDR and a guy named Dewey, a DA from New York. And 2/3 of what he said I didn't understand until later. Being raised the way I was, I didn't understand that I was not understanding. I just listened and moved, and I had little to nothing in my head. The Nolan brothers escaped, and we listened on the radio as they made the run with all the cops after them. News said FBI gunned him down in a whorehouse in New York. And then it was off to the baddest reform school in the U.S. at the time, Chillicothe, Ohio. When I got there, they had the National Guard, and the place was smoking. They had a lot of young men from the Korean War in for murder, and they were some tough guys. I was bad on my streets, but I was no match for them heavies. That place put a hat on me, and I lost my first fight, and the guy got away with it. The lesson saved my life a lot of times, and still sets heavy in my mind's brain. At this point in time, no one but cops had ever whipped me and got away with it. I had built up an illusion in my own mind that I was bad and tough. I punched the bag best and ran best. Best in handball. But in the real, like any coward trying to prove they're not afraid, and I picked my shots. All the guys I thought I couldn't whip, I was nice to. And I was always catching fronts off the others that I thought I could whip. I kept pushing this big clown because I thought he had snitched on me. He begged me to leave him alone, but I touched him up a little and he said, "I don't want to hurt you, Charlie." And that got me mad. And I tore into him with right hands and left hooks, but it didn't faze him. I punched him with everything I had again, and still nothing on his face but, well, it's my turn. He hit me 3 times. Never had I known that feeling. I flashed as if I'd slipped on a melon in the fields on the run, for I had done that before, and it was the only thing I could compare to it. 2 black eyes, busted nose and mouth, blood running from both ears, and a broken fist, laying in the hospital. He came to visit and I told him, "I gotta get you, guy." He said, "I'm going out tomorrow, and you'll never see me." I said, "I'll follow you until I get you. It's in me to do so." He said, "Man, you pushed me to hit you. You were trying to prove something to yourself. That's not my fault. Admit you're wrong." He told me, "A man will never push another man. It's always a boy or a punk that gets off on others. When you become a man, you learn respect by giving respect. When you learn what you can do, if you want to, I could have picked you up and thrown you off the tier. I don't like to be hurt, and I don't like to hurt others." But I didn't want to hear that truth at that stage of life. He left, and to make this story complete, I did meet him later. He was a taxi driver in Wheeling, West Virginia. I seen him, and fear hit me. And I had to get him, but I thought, no one will know if I don't. He said, "Let's go get a drink." And we did and talked about it. I said, "Okay, it's over." He did me a favor. I went out right after that fight in 1954. First time I had been out legally since the early 1940s. And I went back to Wheeling, never realizing I was still 9 years old. At the bus station, I asked a black shoeshine man for change for a dime so I could make a nickel phone call, and he looked at me funny and said, "Man, phone calls ain't been a nickel for years. Where you been, on the moon?" What a trip. I had never had a job in about 3 years of school. The big markets had so much I had never seen. Then I stole a car and took off for Dagoland in Cleveland, Ohio, to see an ex-con who had fought with me in the joint. I sold the car to a gangster from Little Italy. I fought for and with their kids. I was one of the Dukes and Bluebirds of the long ago. In Cleveland, I ran with a Dago Mick named Murphy, running a half-assed crap and card game and living with Murphy's girlfriend's mom. She had 5 daughters. I sat in the barber's chairs and tipped $1, and the family took me into their hearts. I could have been someone, but I had a wife, and I had committed myself to her, so I gave that up. I was young and only on the ground floor, but I could have been a good crook. A lot of my kin were small-time hustlers and gamblers, and I learned. It's no big thing to be a crook, but to me it was in them days. I had met Big Frank in the pen, and he raised his hand for me. He vouched for me. You gotta be honest to be a big crook. Little crooks fake and lie. I didn't fake or snitch, but I was still a hick. When I married Rosie at 20 years old, I had never been around chicks. Rosie played me like the fool that I was. When I was in Cleveland with the mafioso's daughter, Rosie gave me a story about her brother-in-law ripping her off. I got a gun and went back to her in Benwood, West Virginia. The gun wouldn't fire, and Rosie said to me, "Oh, he didn't do it. He just tried." I wanted a red 41 Cadillac. In 1940-41, no cars were made. All was going all out for the war effort. GM was given permissions to make 144,000 Cadillacs. I was told I could have the 41 if I stole a baby blue 52 and gave it to the barbershop people of Little Italy in Cleveland. They gave me some guns, some Frank Sinatra records, and $300. I kept the blue Cadillac like a whole card, in case they didn't give me the red one. I went to Florida with the guns and to work on a tug going to Cuba, but almost got killed when the hammers and triggers were discovered missing from the guns. So I went on a run out of Florida, and with the poker game out of the Jolly Roger Hotel, took the game with me to Fort Lauderdale, then back to me, old Wheeling, West Virginia, and to Georgia. Hot, but nice. I almost stayed. I left with a 1950 hot car, a shotgun, and a straw hat full of dimes. I did 3 years for that. One of my mom's husbands was a window washer at a U.S. courthouse. His name was Deer. They got me out of prison, and she got me a 1954 Ford. I traded it for a 1952 Cadillac and used the name Charlie Deer. After Rosie dumped me, I caught a rich chick in the world and all its treasures were mine. Money, new cars, but that wasn't it. I ran some guns and got busted. I left 3 good girls standing on the corner, each with a dime. I left a caddy, gave it all up and went to Mexico and started over to be a bullfighter. I had a big gun, a hot fast car, TR3, an American passport as William Sergeant Bartlett given to me by the woman's secretary to the ex-president. Her husband was a general of the army. I was learning to cape the horns and playing music in the park each night, where only the pure of heart smoked the good grass. I got caught and was put in Mexico City prison and brought to the U.S. with some Africans being deported back to Kenya by the Mexican Federales and the FBI. After the feds got me, that woman's daughter got 150,000 signatures on a paper to have me brought back from Texas, where I was deported without trial, but the U.S. just drove over it and sent me to McNeil Island in 1960. They still got my car and passport in Mexico. Charles Manson. Letter from prison, circa 1986.